Welcome everybody. For all those that don't know, my name is Vince Ferovich. I'm the head athletic trainer on campus over here. I'm also an instructor over in the exercise science department. And so today, what I'm going to talk about is I'm going to just talk about basically what on-field assessments work with the research and what doesn't necessarily work in the research. Okay. And I've been doing this for a very long time. I've been an athletic trainer for almost a couple decades now, and so I've had a lot of experience, field experience, as well as doing research. When I was in grad school, I did a research project on the balance error scoring system, which is something I'll briefly go over as we're going through. But a lot of times what ends up happening is when we're going through and we're doing a concussion assessment, especially when we're on field, sometimes there's a lot of pressures that are going on, there's lots of distractions. It's not something that's necessarily always conducive to the best assessment. So it's one of those things that I've always looked for different ways to kind of make this a little bit better. Also kind of look at we'll kind of go over what a definition of concussion is, what some of the treatment options are, and what it looks like for the future. So basically, a concussion itself, it's a bruise on the brain, okay? And this usually occurs from some sort of contact, okay? Or where the brain starts sloshing back and forth in the brain, okay? So a lot of times when a concussion happens, the brain itself smacks up against the skull, okay? And then it causes damage to the brain itself, okay? Sometimes those symptoms that end up happening from that are headache, dizziness, issues with coordination, memory, all those different things. Like we said, with causes, usually sometimes it's an indirect force or a direct force, rotational stress, or it can happen from whiplash in the essence of a car crash, or sometimes just activities of daily living. Somebody slips and falls and then goes from there. Some other signs that kind of tip you off to the idea that there might be a concussion: they'll have issues with postural stability, trouble focusing, trouble concentrating, and all that. The diagnostic testing for the concussions, I'm not going to go crazy into explaining all these different ones, but just the different things that you can go to kind of diagnose a concussion or kind of help prove how someone's doing. We've got the neuropsychological testing. This can be done through a computer, or this can be done just on paper format. And going through that process, they've got all kinds of different tests, whether it's memory, cognition, coordination, reaction time. This can all be put together into that type of testing. And for some of these different programs, like I've got listed up over on there, Impact is more of an off-field test that you can do in a computer lab and go on and do it on the computer. But Sway itself is based on the phone, okay, using software that you can use on a sideline assessment for doing that. MRI, CT scans, that's just going through and measuring damage that's done to tissue within the brain. Then you got the biomechanical analysis. I've been kind of looking into this a lot over the last little while. This is a nice little way to kind of see how people are able to hold their postural stability, okay? And see if that's something that's actually changed or not changed in the past. And that's something that through the research, what I've done for years and all that kind of stuff, and I've looked at this, postural stability is the last thing that comes back when people are trying to recover from a concussion. A couple other things on there, the iBox, King-Devick, and VOMS. They're all different tests that go on. The cool one, or that's a little bit newer than the other two, is the iBox itself. I was exposed to this a few years ago. Basically what it does is just looks at the eye tracking, and that's one of the tip-offs for a person that has a concussion. I've tested these things on myself before and seen it on other people. A lot of times when you have a concussion, you have trouble focusing because your eyes cannot focus on a single point. So like we talked about, just the on-field assessments. Here what we do a lot, and what I've kind of researched over a long period of time, something that we use here at the school, we use SCAT-5, okay? And this takes into a lot of different aspects. The neuropsychological testing, it takes in the Glasgow Coma Scale, it goes through coordination, memory, balance, all of those different things into one test, okay? But it's usually a paper-based test. You can do it online, but a lot of times it's paper-based. Balance error scoring system is what I studied when I was in grad school. On the balance error scoring system over there, it's just based on postural stability, and you're changing the surfaces that you're going through. So whether you have a stable surface on a firm ground, or you're using an unstable surface where you've got a foam pad that you're doing those on, that's the differences with the balance error scoring system. Cranial nerve assessments, what you worry about with these ones is if anybody is ever displaying signs where they cannot feel, sense, taste, hear. Those are major things, especially after they've been hit in the head, that I looked for with those. I kind of mentioned a little bit about sway, and then VOMS itself is just kind of an eye tracking test that you go through. I don't generally use this on the sidelines because it's hard to keep someone's attention while we're going through and doing those different ones, so it's not one that I generally do on the sideline. So when we're looking at on-field testing versus off-field testing, on-field testing is really tough because there are always distractions around there. So when somebody's been hit in the head, they're having trouble focusing, okay? And so sometimes you have trouble focusing as well too, because you're trying to go through this test quickly and make a decision, but you get a little bit distracted. With that, testing an individual sometimes, okay? Sorry. Sometimes becomes difficult, especially if you don't know an individual, okay? If you don't know them very well, it becomes a little bit tough because there's all kinds of different things that go into that. You can't always necessarily go with the behavior. Off-field testing, when it's done in a quiet environment, is the best situation that you can get with that, because you want to have the best attention and not have external factors that are driving that. And the other problem with off-field testing sometimes is when you have a healthcare provider and it's only, you may only see that person one time, okay? So an individual will come in and that's the only time that they get a chance to see that person, whereas if I give a plug for athletic trainers, a lot of times when we're dealing with athletes, we see these individuals for long periods of time. We can monitor behavior and go from that process. Baseline assessments, I'm not going to go crazy into this. All I want you guys to know is that with a baseline assessment, it should be done ahead of time. Before someone does activity, there should be some sort of baseline score, and a lot of these assessments are based off of that, so that you know kind of what person's score is going to be like before they get injured. And that's the biggest thing with that. Not everything is clear cut, okay? Sometimes we have special populations that we end up dealing with. One of the big ones that end up happening is sometimes when people have multiple concussions, there's multiple things that go on and they're cumulative effects, okay? So one concussion happens, then they have a second concussion or a third concussion. Their symptoms seem to continue to get a little bit worse, or things start not getting, or they start being a little bit different responses to the care that's being provided. Cardiovascular issues kind of cloud the issue a little bit, just because with the cardiovascular issues themselves, they are similar to what it's like with a concussion, and that sometimes gets people a little bit distracted, and it's tough to kind of determine from that. Psychological issues, ADHD, ADD, okay, learning disorders and all that, it's not exactly the easiest to go through those things, but if you know a person's medical history ahead of time, you can start planning for those things ahead of time, and you can start saying, okay, well, instead of me relying just based on answers that people are talking about, we'll go through objective tests, especially if you don't know that person very well. And then individuals with special needs or para-athletes themselves, you have to come up with a different plan. Now, I don't have a ton of experience with those individuals, but I have worked with some of those. You have to be a little bit creative and use multiple tools in order to kind of make your diagnosis evaluation, okay? With the athletic trainer perspective, like I said before, you get an opportunity to see these individuals on a regular basis, especially in a setting like here over at Missouri Valley College. You're able to see these people on a regular basis. You know what their behavior is going to be like, okay? And an athletic trainer usually evaluates multiple concussions over the course of the year. It's usually not just one, okay? So it's something that we've had lots of practice in. Healthcare providers, from their perspective, like I said, sometimes they only see a patient once in their lifetime, and they have to make a decision based on that one time, okay? And then they may only treat and evaluate a few concussions over the course of the year. That might not be the main thing that they're looking for, unless you're with a neurologist or a neuropsychologist who you go to, but a lot of times people end up going to a nurse or they go to a physician to get evaluated. Educating athletes on concussions. If you're ever looking for education, Heads Up is a really good one with the CDC itself. That's something that I suggest. Going through and just educating individuals, making sure that when people have signs or symptoms of a concussion, that they go and get followed up with. Apologize. Okay, Treatment options for a concussion: rest, okay, concentration and memory tax, light activity, okay, virtual reality, medications, and supplements. You know, with supplements, they've been kind of playing around with some of the research where there's been high dosage of fish oil that's kind of helped with the symptoms of concussion, so it's not so bad itself. And then light activity is something that they've been starting to research, where people, once they've had, you know, about a week of rest and all that, doing some light activity kind of helps out with the process. Some future diagnostic testing and treatment options, okay? Talked a little bit of biomechanical analysis. Virtual reality is kind of something else that they're looking at. AI is something big that they're kind of looking at those different things. And there's some other out-of-the-box ideas like shock absorbers for the neck. They're thinking about increasing the viscosity of fluid in the brain, stem cells, and then new drugs to kind of help out with symptoms. And then in conclusion, you know, concussions are not always easy to diagnose. It's not, you know, there's a lot of different things that go into it. There should be some extra time that's taken on these. It shouldn't be one of those things that's just pushed off to the side. Objective treatments, I found, are way better than subjective treatments. The more objective proof that you can get, the better off you're going to be. Paying attention to small details and the history is very important, as well as their behavior. And then the off-field assessments need to take into account the information presented, as well as what you can draw out of the individual. So you need to go through a good history and talk to them about those different things. And then the last point I'm going to say, the brain will heal the best that it knows how to, as long as it's put in the right situation. Okay, just like any other injury and all that, it needs its time. It can't be pushed. Okay? These are my references. Do I have any questions?
The iBox test, is that the same thing as a gaze nystagmus test? A former prosecuting attorney question for intoxication.
It's similar.
Okay.
Yeah, it's similar. The only difference. Yeah, that's exactly the way that it goes through. It goes through lateral eye tracking, going vertical and horizontal tracking, as well as, you know, going through the I can't think of the name right, but the circumference of the eye, going back and forth. Using all that information, it goes from there, as well as, you know, measuring the diameter of the pupils and, you know, how well, like you said before, the nystagmus goes. Is it able to converge on one point, or is there one eye that's still kind of pushing off to the side and then coming back? Yeah. Go ahead, Chaz.
What is AI, or is there a plan for AI in terms of like immediate assessment for on the field stuff? Because when you're out there doing it, there's a little bit of subjectivity too. So there's a lot of distractions where artificial intelligence, especially with goggles on or something, is going to be less likely to be distracted in terms of providing an initial analysis of what's going on.
Yeah, so I think right now they're kind of looking at the same idea, where they're trying to get away from the distractions and just focus on the cues that are going through. I think what they're going to go through, and they're going to kind of talk a little bit about the eye tracking and seeing if they can measure what the eyes are going through, seeing if there's nystagmus on there. A lot of times when you're going through, if you see a lot of nystagmus going on, you know that something is really messed up. Sometimes people do have that congenitally, but that's a place that AI might be able to go through. The other thing that they might be able to pick up on that we can't see on a regular basis, you can sometimes see these things, but even doing vitals checks, you know, with the AI on top of that. Having goggles might be able to provide some extra proof for that. I know in the summertime, not necessarily the iBox, but at one of the conventions that I went to in Philadelphia, they were talking about these different things. They put me in goggles and they had my eye tracking going. It wasn't necessarily on the AI side of things, but they're starting to lean towards that, and they were showing differences. You know, I didn't get enough sleep that night. So on that, my eyes weren't able to track the dots that I was trying to follow, okay? I didn't have a concussion, but I was tired, and that was one of the side effects. AI might be able to kind of put those together and take normative data and then kind of look at maybe if you've got a baseline on that, or just say, okay, is this person that much further off the normative data than regular, and then put it towards there. But then they'll also help out with, you know, different types of questions. You know, okay, well, you asked all these questions that are on this, but, you know, maybe this person's looking a little bit wobbly, maybe ask about this, or maybe on this memory, start asking them a little bit more, because we know that they have a history of this and this and this.
Pushback from coaches, you probably, I don't know if you have that here, but you saw the Miami quarterback last year. How would you handle that? And as a trainer, When is enough with an athlete as far as the number of concussions? How would you handle that with a coach? Multiple concussions.
So the two parts to that question. When you have individuals that you are trying to help get back out onto the field and you have other interested parties on doing that, you have to be, I like to always have conversations ahead of time and say, hey, listen, this is what I'd like to do in these situations, so that when the situation happens, it's not the first time that you're talking about it. Because when it happens and all that kind of stuff, and it's in the heat of the moment, and people are starting to lose money in that case over there, and jobs in that one, people start becoming desperate. So I try and knock that out ahead of time and start saying, when we have these situations, this is how I want to handle it, okay? On top of that, I like to try and gain extra support on that, you know, get help from neurologists, neuropsychologists, physicians, team physicians on doing those different things, so that it's not just, hey, myself versus a coach. This is my idea versus a coach. We know in the end, most of the time, people want the best for the individual itself, but sometimes we kind of get blinded to those different ideas. And then the second question becomes really hard, because people will tell you all kinds of different stories, and diagnosed concussions are different than concussions that just people believe that they've had, right? And I don't ever take any of that lightly. I'm very cautious on doing those different things. If somebody tells me that they've had symptoms that are similar to a concussion, and then they've had multiple diagnosed concussions after that, I start talking to them and I start saying, okay, well, how long has it taken you to fully recover? If an individual starts telling me, okay, well, you know, it took me, 2 months after the last concussion to recover, and then they come into me, they have another concussion, and that might take them 4 months to recover fully, getting back into the classroom, getting back out into the field, doing activities of daily living. I'm starting to have that conversation with that individual and say, okay, how important is it for you to continue competing in a sport as opposed to the rest of your life? And that's conversations that I've had to have in the past. I'm like, where are you going with these different things? Is the risk worth the reward? That's how I look at it. Go ahead, Tamika.
I found that you stated about the fish oil as being something that people have used to try to help the healing process or recuperating. But is that something that, or I don't know, the studies to take vitamin or fish oil vitamins or supplements to in some of those higher impact sports to prevent the signs, symptoms, like trying to treat it before you have one kind of thing? I don't know if there's...
Actually, I'm glad that you brought it up like that. I've always looked at it from just a treatment side of things as opposed to a preventive side of things. There are a lot of studies that have suggested that the more omega-3s that you have, the healthier the brain is, and the better off it is to be able to recover from inflammation, which happens in the body. So there are some places that are trying to do that as a preventative thing. I don't know necessarily in the context of maybe making it, to kind of hide symptoms. I don't think that's the case. I think it's more just the fact of just brain health in general. So like high dose supplements of omega-3s or fish oils themselves, as long as they're pure and all that kind of stuff, have shown to have some results. And I don't say these things without having tried these. I've used them with different people before. It's not perfect. It doesn't mean that a person's going to actually go through and become 100% better, but their symptoms might get less. They might be able to have less issues with memory. They might be able to not have as many headaches or dizziness, all those different things.
Walnut's supposed to be good for that too, isn't it?
I have to look into that.
I think so. And they even look like little brains.
The
Walnuts do.
Yeah. Walnuts have a lot of healing properties. They definitely do. Okay. Any other questions? All right, great. Thank you very much.